If you like Asterix and the rest of the crazy goals, and you fantasize about being one of the Three Musketeers, I have a treat for you, a combination of both in the form of a video game, Engard. Greetings everyone, welcome to the Impressions, where I present a game and you'll decide if I piqued your interest. The review premise is the perspective of a casual player with constructive criticism and an occasional sprinkling of game development insight. This swashbuckling adventure has its beginnings as a graduation student project. A team of 8 students from Sub-Infogame Rubica School, based in Valencia, France, created a project that won awards for Best Student Game at the 2018 Ping Awards, 2019 Gradzin Games, and 2019 Independent Games Festival. In 2020, this team founded the Fireplace Games Company, began full game development, and released the project on August 16, 2023. My first encounter with this title was a demo version during the Steam Next Fest of June 2023. It was a shorter version of the game's first episode, which caught my attention since I enjoy games with melee combat. The adventure is about Adalia de Volador and her fight against the power-hungry Count Duke and his oppression of the city. The game's setting is a fantasized vision of 17th century Spain, although it feels more like a Spanish colony in South America. More about that later. Shortly saying, it's a story about a hero's fight against an evil regime. Sounds familiar? Well, the writer probably drew inspiration from stories like The Three Musketeers or Zorro. I'm assuming the first since it is French literature and the developers are French. Two main gameplay elements are combat and platforming. Apart from those, there are collectibles and secrets for world building. What sells the game is a whole lot of environmental interactions that extends basic combat. Our heroine is very agile. Running, jumping, rolling, climbing or even swinging on ropes is nothing to her. This makes the platforming and combat enjoyable with the right touch of sophistication. Adalia has her trusty sword, a rapier, ready for dueling. A sword attack mechanic has 4 consecutive attacks accompanied by parry and riposte mechanics. The combat is designed around the enemy guard meter and hit points. Enemy life is presented as red hit points above the guard meter, and it takes only 1 accurate attack to remove a hit point. This requires breaking a full guard, and each hit point has its own guard. However, breaking the enemy guard isn't as simple as it might appear, since enemies have indefensible attacks and can riposte. Therefore, the focus is more rather on tactical gameplay than a quick guard draining through multiple fast attacks. Even though the game in the first episode tricks players into trusting the fast gameplay. I was one of them. There's also a surprise mechanic, where the player can catch enemies off guard and receive an additional chance to strike. To achieve surprise, Adalia can throw an item at the enemy, kick him or dodge an indefensible attack. Acrobatics will also accomplish that effect. The player is encouraged to utilize environmental combat when dealing with enemies or bosses. To help with that, our heroine can either kick an object towards the enemy or kick an enemy towards a destroyable object. This will damage or weaken the opponent's guard, and an enemy will instantly die if it falls into water or a chasm. A multitude of items to throw gives different results. For example, opponents can be put on fire or disoriented with a bucket or powder bag. Another part of the combat mechanics is panache, a hero's energy similar to mana for magic. The player will gain panache through various actions like parry, riposte, surprise or acrobatics. If the player gains enough panache, they can trigger special skills, secret attack, tornado strike and surprise kick. Using a special skill can heal a little of Adalia's health. Her entire defense is 6 life points and no guard, which is surprising since all enemies have a guard meter. The world of Engard has 6 types of enemies apart from the bosses. The first effortless enemy is Lucky, a squirmy character that's easily staggered and quickly disposed of, only 1 health point. His strength lies in numbers, especially if accompanied by soldiers or a captain. Speaking of soldiers, heavily armored with heavier attacks, where some are indefensible, knows how to riposte and has a life of 2 points. Although not overly challenging, it does take a bit longer to handle and typically comes in pairs. Grenadier, a distance-based enemy, will make combat areas filled with explosions and is always a priority. Yet, dealing with those tricky women is not easy as they run away and it's almost impossible to hit them. Stunning the enemy with a thrown object or using the grenades against the carrier will do the job. Captain is a dangerous foe if underestimated. She's much faster than the other enemies and has a shield, which needs to be broken before Adalia can deal with the enemy's guard. Furthermore, having a life of only 2 points, the captain becomes enraged after losing the first one, causing her an increase in running and attack speed, which can be painful for the player. Next, we have an elite soldier, who is more of a musketeer than a soldier, knows how to duel and has a different defense. This enemy demands from the player a perfect fight to break the entire guard, which is to parry, dodge and riposte without any mistake. Otherwise, the enemy will correct the posture and his guard will be as untouched. The final enemy type is Duelist, a French version of Elite Soldier. It is a slightly different moveset, but the core behavior is similar. Both types have 2 life points. Nonetheless, it's not easy fighting multiple Elite Duelists, since avoiding an attack of the second enemy will restore the guard of the first one Adalia engaged. It is necessary to distract individual opponents so the player can deal with them one by one. On the other hand, Elites and Duelists are even more troublesome when accompanying the boss. When it comes to bosses, the game features 3 of them, 1 per episode, and all of them are in the final 4th stage. All bosses have 4 hit points, which creates a longer duel time and compels players to be more cautious of their mistakes. The first is El Vigilante, a mysterious character helping to train our heroine. Dueling him isn't that hard, although it is a first boss. Players are eased into the game's difficulty. The second boss is Adalia's first encounter with Count Dooku, definitely a more demanding enemy, and fighting him is similar to the fights with captains. Apart from the boss, numerous additional soldiers fill the arena, increasing the difficulty of focusing on the Count Dooku. The third boss in the game is Zaida, another vigilant female musketeer. Moreover, the conversation between her and our hero suggests a previous romance. Zaida is a demanding enemy with a few tricks up her sleeve. One is throwing grenades from a distance, and the second is creating multiple spectres of herself who needs to be dealt with. The world of Vanguard features collectibles as points of interest, with information and lore about the world and its inhabitants, some of which are hidden away as secret areas. Apart from the single-player story experience, the game also provides an arena mode, challenge-based gameplay with additional modifiers, those that strengthen our hero and those that weaken. Simply speaking, buffs and debuffs. The gameplay loop is straightforward. The player starts a round when a weakness is assigned. For example, one of the Panar skills is unavailable, and can choose one from 3 drawn strengths. After selection, the player is spawned in a random arena from the story mode. Another modifier screen appears when all enemies are defeated. The arena is completed. The run ends after finishing all arenas in a selected difficulty run. This game mode can be compared to many roguelike games, like Hades. Each episode of the game has its own location. All locations are designed nicely and are reminiscent of existing places. In the majority, as our heroine progresses through different areas, the game follows a linear structure. Only a few locations are introduced twice, and it is a nice touch of realism from the living world. The level design is crafted well, utilizing all of Adalia's movement for platforming and creating verticality. The platforming and exploration part of the levels brings memories of Assassin's Creed 2 and its depiction of Italian cities. Episode 2 of Vanguard especially had me reminiscing about Venice from AC2. Many areas have introduced the Valve principles of level design, which adds to the world building quality with enjoyment from exploration and locating secrets. Through both plot and storytelling secrets, Vanguard presents a world with memorable characters and rather hilarious narration. There are many similarities between the game and Asterix, particularly when it comes to enemy behavior after defeat.
This isn't the last you've seen of me!
A hilarious narration is achieved by the comic book-like aesthetic, funky animations, and joyful enemy voice acting. The comedic aspect is cohesive for all the game elements, whether aesthetic, visual effects, cinematics, or user interface. As mentioned, the game has a comic book-like aesthetic, although it is a mix of cartoon, realism, and cel shading. The game looks closer to Overwatch than 13. The developers have chosen a simple visual style, yet it does contain a significant amount of detail in the environment. Apart from that, there's a great way of presenting a distant environment. It is similar to a painting, giving the game a more magical, fairy tale-like vibe. Visual effects, while being stylized and creating a 3D environment mood, are consistent with the comic book feel, especially during combat. Every character in the world of Vanguard is carefully animated in a way that can be described as a combination of 3D animation and stop-motion technique. This adds to the fidelity of the cartoonish vibe. The highlight is watching enemies splash flat on the wall after being kicked. The narration for the episode introduction and ending is done straightforwardly. Any cinematic involves a direct camera movement through motionless scenes without animation or effects. This supports the premise of the comic book. The user interface is done well and simple, with all the elements readable. The HUD has two layers, one displayed on the screen and the second within a 3D environment around enemies' heads. The first presents Adalia's health and panache meters, available skills, current objective, and optional subtitles for any voice lines. The second layer represents the enemy's guard meter, life points, and mood like being stunned, surprised, or angry. The audio layer is designed uniformly with the rest of the game. The music elevates the mood of Hispanic culture and the comedic story narration. The game features numerous sound effects to inform the player about his actions, combat results, and potential dangers. All of them are crafted as a part of the comic book vibe. All the characters in the game are voiced and have many lines, which will keep the player engaged and curious. Spanish culture is notably presented in the game's music. Playing it, no one will have doubts about the mood and inspiration behind the fantasy world. The composer has effectively captured the comedic storytelling, and it complements the narration seamlessly. As I said earlier, I've played the demo version, which caught my attention. Previously, I've never played any swashbuckling game, so this is an intriguing gaming title. Let's go through the things that make this game great and those that could have used more time in the oven. The plot of Vanguard is nothing remarkable. It is about a hero of the people fighting against the evil regime, although it achieves the introduction of the heroine with her purpose, quite like a comic book superhero shown in the middle of an action situation. I'm rating the story 7 out of 10. It keeps the player entertained and interested in plot development, however, it lacks little bits about Adalia's and her brother's beginnings. Some backstory was presented in the standard project, however, for me it's not cohesive with the complete game and most players won't know it. The main villain is evil because it's required of him. He doesn't have depth since he's only hungry for power for the sake of having it, while his plan isn't elaborate and feels like a slapstick scenario. Modern art has accustomed audiences to multidimensional characters, and that's missing despite the game being inspired by literature and comedy comics. The gameplay is what brought interest in the title. Whole combat with its environmental stuff, panache and diverse enemies gives quite a lot of fun and enjoyment, and that's what's most important, the entertainment. The combat is responsive and the surrounding mechanics are well designed. However, the auto-targeting mechanic, guard with strike enemies and throwing countless opponents along the boss will be troublesome. The swashbuckling is fantastic and feels very organic. I'm not sure about accuracy when it comes to such fighting dueling style. If you're interested in dueling with rapiers, I'd recommend Scalagrin videos. The tactical element of encounters with riposte and surprise mechanic works very well. Environmental combat is a superb addition, which gives another layer to all the fights. It's satisfying to throw a metal jug into an enemy's face. Panache with special skills are helpful, although not necessary. Using special skills gives a temporary advantage, yet it isn't significant, except for restoring part of health. Unfortunately, the combat suffers from unfair system behavior of opponents. All advanced enemies, bosses, captains, elites, and duelists, while attacking heroine, snap to her position. What does it mean for the player? Escaping always costs health points, because even if the player does a roll dodge, the opponent's attack will reach the player. Among a large group of foes, this increases the difficulty level and it's very chaotic. Differentiation of enemies is sufficient for the game's length. However, reusing all of the bosses in the final chapter seems like a lazy storytelling choice. Points of interest are a straightforward way of introducing more depth to the world, pleasant addition, and wasn't overused. The arena mode adds more replayability for the game for the players who finish all the extra activities in story mode. To summarize the gameplay, I rate it 6 out of 10. The combat will create a higher difficulty curve for casual players playing with the default settings. Why talk about default settings and not suggest changes? I believe it is how the team envisioned the game and how it should be played, although I'm not entirely sure of that. With all these choices, the power fantasy of Adalia is lost by being overwhelmed with realistic enemy behavior. On a positive note, the player can pet the chicken. The world is crafted well with proper inspiration from the real world. The level design creates enjoyable gameplay. The use of Adalia's movement is excellent and makes the platforming very enjoyable. There aren't many secrets, although finding them is satisfying and not so obvious. The world building with level design is rated 8 out of 10. The earlier mention of the setting being like a Spanish colony in South America is dictated by the vegetation and the environment. Some plants presented in the game did not exist in 17th century Spain. They are native to South America and were imported to Spain. Fortunately, the game does not feature any location names to anchor the player within the world, so it can be taken as a fantasy tale. As I repeated multiple times, the game achieved the comic book vibe, and the visual style extended it. I rate the visual style as 9 out of 10, apart from one minor detail, everything was cohesive and enjoyable. The detail in question is a water shader that looks more like a liquid glass than stylized water. I understand that the artist wanted to include transparency for water, but in this case it was unsuccessful. The audio with all the different layers works together seamlessly, creating a joyful experience. All the sound effects are designed to fit the game's mood, especially the combat sections. The player will be immersed in the fight against the opponents. I'm rating the audio 9 out of 10, mainly because of the voice acting. The voice acting is what sells the comedic feel in this game. Adalia and her foes, bosses, have distinct voices, and the actors did a tremendous job acting out those characters.
We'll see how elegant and artful he is once I'm done with him.
Alright, well, just don't mess up his face, yeah?
The rest of the opponents are also voiced, and the player will hear the banter between our heroine and enemies. As a cherry on top, there is a commentary from defeated soldiers, which reminds me of beaten legionaries from Asterix.
Oh no, she's coming back!
And let's not overlook the incredible score composed by Jean-Claude Chalier. In-game, it works wonderfully, elevating the mood. As a listening experience, it's for those who enjoy Spanish music, although it will go nicely alongside music from Pirates of the Caribbean or Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag.
Stay out of the Count Duke's plans! On guard!
The one word to summarize the game? Amusing. I would rate the game 8 or even 8.5 out of 10. However, the uneven and unfair enemy behavior creates discouraging moments when the game loses its power fantasy. Therefore, the game as a whole is rated 7 out of 10. It is charming and surprising, but it also will be frustrating. A few elements would benefit from slight improvements. This section is after the verdict because the following feedback shouldn't alter the whole experience or the game's reception. However, potential improvements would make the game less infuriating. The primary issue lies in unfair combat mechanics and enemy behavior. Addressing the snapping of enemy attacks for the player character would go a long way and reduce the unfairness. Another thing would be creating a fair approach when fighting multiple enemies with a perfect guard. Not every situation allows environmental distraction. During encounters with Count Duke, it's tough to distract elites or duelists to deal with one of them while having aggressive boss behavior and many additional opponents. The second feedback point concerns reused bosses of El Vigilante and Zaida in the game's final chapter. Both fights are placed within the story to make the level feel like the culmination of the entire game. However, knowing that Adalia has defeated them previously, she knows their tricks and can deal with them faster. That's why I would prefer both bosses to have 3 life points and a weaker guard. The third point of feedback is a culmination of the previous points. It's understandable that the final boss, Count Duke, needs to be challenged. Still, I would expect his abilities to be expanded rather than have many henchmen thrown at the player. Therefore, the boss having 6 health points and additional abilities, for example throwing grenades, would be more fitting. This way the fight would be demanding and wouldn't require overwhelming the player with many opponents, making the entire fight more satisfying. The next point, fourth, is more of a quality of life improvement. The optional combat challenges that are available to achieve should be visible from the start in the episode brief, like in Doom 2016. With the current design, if the player doesn't unintentionally complete the challenge, it's required to replay the entire level. Some challenges are connected to the boss fights at the episode end, and this artificially extends the gameplay time while being undesirable for players. Another way to solve this would be having unlockable checkpoints. The fifth matter was already mentioned in the visual summary. The shader material for transparent water needs a little tinkering to ensure the look of water and not liquid glass. The sixth point concerns the UI font used for showing subtitles. There is a lot of banter between characters in game, so subtitles are constantly visible with a crude design. Simple form fonts with a strong outline and shadow make it look like a proof of concept or prototype, while the main menu option text or player objective text is decorative, legible and clean. Updating the look of these subtitles to be less invasive on the heart would give the game a high quality look. The current look is readable, yet it feels like it was glued on later. The seventh is more like a trend in modern games. Requirement for the player to manually progress the conversation between two characters. This breaks the immersion, forcing the player to be more focused on what moment to push the button and move the exchange further, instead of listening to the storytelling. This is a useful quality of life when people have distractions in their homes, like pets, children, or a visit from a courier. However, I'd prefer an option to turn on auto conversation progress when the voice line finishes playing. That way, developers could curate the pauses between lines to create a believable and immersive narrative, similar to the cinematics. That's all, and this is my critique. All the links are in the description. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.